Welcome to Journaling with Nature, the podcast for those who want to turn curiosity into wonder, a pencil sketch into a rabbit hole of discovery, a moment of stillness into a life full of joy. I'm your host, Bethan Burton. Let's open the pages of our nature journals and explore this world together. Hello, this is episode 149. I hope you're doing well. I am very excited to share today's conversation with you. I enjoyed this one so much, and again, while I was revisiting this chat during the editing process, I had a huge smile on my face just from the joy and enthusiasm that my guest Leandra Taylor has when telling stories about her experiences in nature. Leandra is an artist, scientist, and educator, as well as a birdwatcher, hiker, and mountaineer. In our conversation, we spoke about Leandra's connection to nature, which has been a constant in her life since childhood, the different media through which she expresses her creativity and nature connection, her love of birding and hiking, as well as her biggest adventure out in the world and her smallest moments of wonder close to home. Let's listen. Welcome, Leandra. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I am very excited to be here with you, and I love to go back. I always start at the beginning of someone's story and really the beginning of their connection with nature and with creativity. And I'm really interested to hear some of your early stories of nature experiences in your early years.
Oh, I love this question. Because I feel like it's an opportunity to redefine, like, what does it mean to be outdoors? So both my parents growing up were in the Army, so I'm an Army brat. And with that comes a lot of changes and moving and, people are here and then they're there. But nature for me was my constant. Like, it was like we had this beautiful backyard in my house in Colorado Springs. And I just loved being back there. Like, everything about my imagination was fostered in that backyard. And all of my art and drawings from that age are like anthills and butterflies and very inspired by nature. So my earliest memories of being outside are in that backyard with my brothers, and we would steal the silverware from the kitchen and like dig tunnels in the sandbox. We had a huge sandbox back there. And I think, in addition to that, I loved watching the Crocodile Hunters. So Steve Irwin was like that. It was my jam. Like, I was just like, I lived for it. I loved watching animal documentaries growing up, and it was my way to like see the world and imagine all of these different things. So that was like, if I wasn't outside, I was inside watching something about outside.
Isn't it interesting? I've had a number of guests who have talked about nature experiences, but also nature documentaries actually being quite significant just for maybe igniting their imagination or the excitement about being outdoors. I love that the Crocodile Hunter was that for you.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's like the world is so expansive. And when you're watching those documentaries, you realize like how many things are out there that you've never even heard of before.
Yeah, absolutely. And so now you're an artist, but you're also an environmental scientist and educator. And I'm really interested in that career development, the trajectory of what happened after being a kid playing in nature and experiencing that in your childhood and until now. Did you study? Did you know what you wanted to do? Was the path clear, or did it unfold?
I will say the path was very nonlinear. I don't know. I feel like there was definitely some clarity in there. I loved the environment. And so I will say my moment for me, I think I was a senior in high school. I was either a junior or a senior, and I took an environmental science course. And we watched this documentary about the trash vortex. I think it's like in the Pacific Ocean, and it's like this huge mass of trash. And I remember my teenage mind just being so blown because I was like, what do you mean? I've definitely seen litter, like, like when you're out and you're just living life, you see litter in trash places. But the idea that humans have littered so much that there is a mass like as big as some of the states in the United States, it was mind blowing. And I felt really compelled to be a part of the solution. Didn't know what that looked like yet. And so when I went to college, I actually was undecided and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. My parents weren't necessarily saying, yeah, go major in art. And so that didn't feel like an avenue that made as much sense. I do have some regrets that I didn't at least try, but I stumbled upon another environmental science course my freshman year, and that really just kind of sealed the deal for me. After that, I was like, oh, this is it. Things are making sense to me. And I loved studying in environmental science. So I ended up getting my bachelor's degree from Baylor University in Texas. And it was really cool to just see all of the different types of classes you can take. I don't think I really knew how to do college when I was there. So I was really just experiencing things and trying to figure it out as I was going. But environmental science was the way. And I don't know if I had like a clear vision of what my career would look like. I just knew like I wanted to save the planet. Like I think that was literally how I was phrasing it in college.
Yeah. Yeah. And then what was the next step? So you graduated and started work. What happened after that?
Yeah, so I graduated in 2014. So, we're a decade out of college now.
It's amazing, isn't it? As time passes.
Yeah, time really flew by. So one of the classes that I had taken was Geographic Information Systems, and it's all about, geospatial analyses and making maps, and it was very cool. I loved it. And I didn't realize how valuable that skill was until I was trying to get into the workforce. And I got my first internship with the Student Conservation Association. I was based in Albuquerque, New Mexico. So it was my first time leaving home and like living somewhere by myself. And I was doing whooping crane data analysis for about 2 years. And that was when I learned about bird watching.
Yes.
So that like unlocked like a whole new world for me. And I got to work under the regional statistician. So I had the opportunity to do all of these different types of field surveys and learn about all the ways that science was being applied, like right in the place that I was living. So I think kind of learning about those things in college, but seeing it in action afterwards was like, oh, this is so cool. And I absolutely loved it. Like I was just infatuated by the thought of the whooping crane population going from critically endangered, less than 100 birds to, after 60 plus years, it was 60 at the time, I think it's 70, but 70 years of conservation efforts, they're over, I think over 500 right now.
Wow.
I could be exaggerating, but
that's a beautiful
I could
story.
see the growth. Yeah, in the data. So I spent about 2 years just geeking out with that data, like by myself with my supervisor, and really just thinking about like, what does it mean to be a part of that, like to be a part of conservation?
Yeah, wow. And tell me about your role now.
Yeah, so right now I'm the Partnership and Community Outreach Coordinator for the Southern Appalachian Wilderness Stewards, and we are a conservation nonprofit based in Asheville, North Carolina. I work remotely outside of Atlanta, Georgia, so in Marietta, Georgia. And I'll say that my path to this position was also pretty nonlinear. So after I did the whooping crane data stuff, I realized that I really missed interacting with people and like doing environmental education. My favorite part of being a data assistant was that I got to like communicate that science to other people. And so that was like, education was just kind of that next pathway. And so I did some environmental education, volunteering. I worked for a national wildlife refuge and spent my time there building community and learning about like coalition building. Like, what does it mean for all these organizations to start working collectively for a larger goal versus like in our silos, kind of replicating each other's work. And so my position now is very similar. So kind of thinking about designated wilderness, which in the US is like there's a federal designation for specific landscapes. And there are different characters about wilderness that are really special. So like opportunities for solitude, like you're not as likely to see other humans. It's untrammeled. So that means like we're not interfering with nature's natural processes. It's natural. And there might be opportunities for other significant features about that landscape. And so I don't think I knew about federally designated wilderness until I started working here and really thinking about like, how do we create pathways for people to access wilderness?
Yeah, wow. I'm interested in your thoughts about storytelling, because when you're interacting as an environmental educator and you're teaching people about the importance of wilderness areas or whatever it is, storytelling can be a big part. And I'm interested in what storytelling means to you and how that helps communicate environmental messages in your experience.
Yeah, so I'm a Gemini. I'm just going to throw it out there. I love chatting. I love storytelling, and storytelling for me is a way to connect with people and on like a really personal level. And I think one of the things that I love about communicating science is helping people relate it to their daily lives.
Yeah.
And so like nature is right outside your door, like literally just crack your window and get some fresh air, if you have the luxury of fresh air. And I feel like storytelling is a way to really share your experiences, whether it's good or bad, or like really adding the personality of that experience with someone else that wasn't there. So I don't know how to really describe it without it being like, yeah, I love telling stories.
Yeah. I really think that it totally grabs you. And just like you were grabbed by that documentary of the island of plastic in the Pacific Ocean, you know, something like that. It just, especially when filtered through someone's experience, oh, this happened to me and this is what I felt and that sort of thing. It really grabs you and it starts the process of you engaging directly with that experience, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite stories from when I was still an intern for the Fish and Wildlife Service at this time, and I traveled down to Aransas, Texas, which is where the whooping cranes are, and I will never forget the first time I actually got to see one in person.
Tell
me
like about that.
Magnificent. Okay, so they're 5 feet tall to start, and so they're already large birds.
That's taller than me.
Yeah, they have some height on them, and their wingspan is even wider. I think it's like wider than 6 feet. You should Google all of these things. So just, I'm not exaggerating. But yeah, they are the largest bird of North America. And, I went down to Aransas, and I was there for a conference, but I snuck away. I got some time on the refuge, and I was walking around and I could hear the calls of the cranes in the distance. And I remember like looking out from the observation tower, and we're going to get to how much I'm afraid of heights, but I'm at the top of this tower by myself, trying to, look through my binoculars into the distance and find the whooping cranes. And I did. I found, flocks of them, but I could see the family units. Like I could see the two parents, and then there would be the chick sometimes. And because I had studied their data, I was looking on their ankles for like the monitoring bands, the radio collars. So I could see some of the stuff that I'm like, I'm studying this right now, and I can see it happening right in front of me. And that is like, I love whooping cranes. I could just talk about them all day. But that for me, like, really solidified how much I really appreciated what I was getting to be a part of.
That's incredible. I love that story. I wonder, in your experience as an environmental educator, those moments, and it's so gratifying when you see someone have that experience of wonder. So I studied environmental education when I was at uni as well, and you forget a lot of the stuff that they tell you in your degree, but at the end I came out, and the main thing that I remember from that degree was that you have to get someone to change their behavior to pro-environmental behavior. You need to move them. You need to give them an experience of awe or wonder or surprise or a visceral sense of something magnificent happening or shock, or, you have to move them emotionally. And in your experience, I wonder about that. When you take people out or you're sharing stories, that moment, you can see it on people's faces sometimes when they get it, or they've had that moment of awe, or they, like you did with the whooping cranes. Tell me about that. It's watching other people experience these moments.
For sure. I think one of the most rewarding parts of my work is getting to help people connect to nature or reconnect if they, did it when they were younger, but they don't do it anymore. And I work with people of all ages, and I feel like my favorite are the people that have a little resistance. Maybe it was someone else's idea for them to go, and now they ended up here. And I've definitely had teens tell me like, I don't want to go. And that's such a valid experience. I think there was one specific hike. I took some kids out, and it was raining that day, and I could see like they were kind of miserable. And so I got started with my, this is me, we're going to go walking. But I love finding things on the ground and just like discovering as we're going. So it's kind of an immersive walk, immersive experience. And we're finding caterpillars, and we're identifying flowers and mushrooms. And all of a sudden you can see them seeing things they haven't seen before, whether or not they've been to that place. And I think by the end of it, we were all, huddled over the ground with our Seek app out, trying to identify plants and animals. And the young girl that told me she wasn't excited at the end came up and gave me a little crystal that she had found. And she was like, we're best friends now. And for me, I'm like, okay, I'll take that as a win because you enjoyed this hike by the end of it. And those are the people that I love connecting with because I feel like there is something for everybody in nature. You just have to find your thing.
Yeah, I love that so much. Tell me about what nature teaches you about yourself, about the world, the things, the personal sort of moving experiences that you've had in nature.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like I've had an experience most times when I'm in nature. And I think it's the stillness, it's that quietness where like you're away from your phone and all the conversations and the TV and the sounds, and you can just be with your thoughts. And maybe there's birds and water and you're like tuning into all these different sounds. And there have been a couple of different lessons that have really stuck with me. I think how small we are and how big the world is something that never escapes me. Like you can be standing in one spot and just see for miles and miles. And I think also embracing changes like the seasons, which is why I called my art persona or my business Seasonal Leaves, kind of embracing that seasonal change and that transition. And nothing really ever stays the same, for better or worse. And I think that that's something that nature taught me. And when I was having like a really tough time embracing that, I would just go outside, even if it was raining. And then I just feel like now we're crying together. Yeah. So I don't know. There's just these different ways that I feel connected in nature. And then the third one I wanted to share is that like, and I think we're going to touch on climbing Mount Kilimanjaro, which is one of my favorite stories. I could tell this story every day, but the lesson that I took home from that was like how many of my limits were self-imposed, like how many things I was telling myself I could do before I had even tried it. And really redefining like, what does support look like for me? And how do I want people to show up for me? So those are all things that I feel like I've seen or learned in nature. I'm reminded by it every day. And those are the things that like, I find comfort in those things. I'm like nature, I could just watch nature and she is the example for me.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And that reminds me of a feeling that I have as well in nature, that it's almost like a parent, almost like there's this solidity to nature. And I experienced it especially through the pandemic because everything was going wild out in the world. And yet here's nature just doing
doing its natural thing.
Yeah. And it's the stability of that, even though nature is always in flux, nothing in nature really is in balance. It's always moving and changing, like you say. There's a solidity to that, the continuation of it. We can make a mess over here and do whatever. And yet ants are still doing their thing and birds are still waking up and doing the dawn chorus. And there's some sort of parental safety in that, in a way.
Yeah. I do feel like it gives you a warm hug. Like the way sunshine feels on your skin is like, it's just, you can't really describe that feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned seasonal changes, and I would love for you to describe, I always ask my guests about their place in the world, what they see when they go outdoors, what kind of nature is surrounding them. And I'm really interested in seasonality as well. So I'd love to hear about your nature, what you experience when you go outside, and also what different seasons through the year look like where you live.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm pretty new to Georgia. I moved here a year ago, but I'll share the things that I've noticed about my backyard because I love being in my backyard. Yeah. I think it is a great space for people to connect with nature. And so in the Southeast in the US, it's much more, there's a lot more rain. I'm used to the Southwest. And so I grew up with just more dry climate, colder winters, but here there's this humidity that is just constantly here. And in a good way, it depends if you like humidity or not. And I'm a creature of habit. So when I find a place that I like, I usually revisit that place very often. And then also as a scientist, I'm like, what are the things that I'm seeing changing over the season? So I might notice which plants are in bloom first. So now I know spring is here because I'm seeing daffodils, I'm seeing the crocus, the cardinals are singing. And those are things that I've started to pick up on as the seasons change. I've noticed like these are the things that consistently change with those seasons. And I love just seeing literally the seasons change. Like I'll go out in the summer, I'm on the same trail. I'm noticing that there's mushrooms here because there's much more rain. And then when I go out in the fall, there's just as much rain, but I notice there aren't as many mushrooms in that same way. And so I think nature also reminds me to like always be asking your questions. There might be a very simple answer, but it's okay to discover and like have that curiosity and joy. I love bird watching, but for some reason I'm always looking at the ground. I feel like my eye is really trained for like, I'll be sitting there and just see an inchworm, like very, like just super tiny inchworm crawling on a leaf somewhere. And I'm like, only because I'm staring at the ground did I see that really cool thing. So nature in my eyes is definitely about the small details, but also like the larger patterns, the swirls, the waves, those are all things that I bring back into my art.
Yes, I was just about to say swirls and waves are reflected in your art. Let's talk about art. Tell me about where it started, where it's going. Tell me all about your art and your self-expression.
Thank you. I'm getting better at talking about myself as an artist. So I have always been an artist. It's not an identity I always embraced and celebrated in that way, but I've always been really creative and I love colors and, being really creative. I started out with colored pencils and drawing, and took some classes in high school, really loved it. But it's always something that's been a part of me and just kind of creativity in general. And I wanted to major in art in college, and my parents were not as supportive about that. And I let that define me for a little while. And so I decided to major in environmental science, but about, 6 or 7 years later, I was circling back to my original love, which is art, and also realizing that those two things don't have to be separate. And so that was when I joined my love for art and nature kind of in the same breath. And I was starting to explore, like, what is my relationship with nature? What is Blackness in nature? Like, what does that mean to me? What are the ways that I see myself reflected in nature? And so I started kind of sharing that through art. And I think, in some of the spaces when I was living in Albuquerque, art was my way of telling stories. So I started doing like comics and other things that were helping me to articulate some of what I was feeling that I didn't feel like I had the words to say. And so art became the avenue for that. And I feel like that was such a beautiful time for me to kind of discover both. Like, I'm like, I can do both of these at the same time. And then I was introduced to nature journaling. And that was like, turned a whole new page.
Isn't it just such a great melding for people who love nature, who love art, and maybe haven't known how to put those two together, but it's such a wonderful enmeshing of those two things. How did you discover it? Did you just find someone who was doing it? Did you come to it in a different way? Tell me about that.
Yeah, I was taking a master naturalist course while I was living in New Mexico, and so we're learning about all of the natural history, the history, all the different parts of the state. And in one of our guest speakers was an artist that had, I wish I remembered her name, but she had all of her nature journals, and she introduced us to the practice of nature journaling, starting with kind of the loose hand drawings and making observations. And I just loved it. Like, I was like, I could do this all day. Like, this is my thing now. And it's become one of my favorite activities to do when I'm outside and inside. It's like one of my favorite pastimes is to just, go through pictures and exploring my observations. And when I'm outside and I don't have service, it's a great way to pick up on things that I want to look up later and discover, asking my little questions. But I also think it can be a space where you just journal, where you just write, where you're just painting or doodling. It doesn't have to be necessarily what you're looking at in nature. And so I like the free form feeling of like your journal is whatever you want it to be.
Yeah, I really believe that. I really believe that your nature journal can be whatever connects you with nature, whatever makes you feel calm. You mentioned stillness, and I think that that's such an important healing part of being in nature, and that can come through when you're just writing your thoughts out on a page. And yeah, I love that you've brought up these things. You mentioned two things that I think are really important. You talked about curiosity and joy, and I feel like with nature journaling, or with even with this mindset of openness and exploration when you're going outside, I feel like there's a flow that happens when you go outside and you're ready to be curious. It leads to wonder, and wonder in my mind is something that we can experience every day. And you talked about that a backyard is a wonderful place to spend time and find nature. But I feel like curiosity leads to wonder, and wonder, when you're living in a space of wonder, it leads to joy. Does that resonate with you? Does that feel like the truth?
Yeah, I feel like it all kind of goes together like a song. Like
Yeah.
I feel like you just kind of let yourself be taken away into the breeze. I don't really know how to describe it outside of letting yourself get into that flow state where you are like you're embracing the stillness, but you've also kind of unlocked your, I don't know, your nature mind. And I feel like you're noticing or seeing things that you may not have seen if you hadn't taken that pause.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned questions, and I'm wondering about, and looking things up, I wonder if, as a scientist, you're always searching for answers, or if open-ended questions feel comfortable or uncomfortable to you.
Yeah, I embrace all questions. I will admit I don't always find the answer. Sometimes I also have just kind of a short attention span. So sometimes it's just a part of that moment is just embracing the curiosity. And sometimes I'm really curious and I'll remember it later and I'll be like, oh, I was going to Google that thing and figure out what the answer was. But I also think it's fun to form your own question or opinion, your own observation, hypothesis, if you will, and then keep making observations until you feel like you've gotten your answer and then compare it to what it is that you could find. So I don't know if that makes sense, but I'll give an example. During COVID, I spent a lot of time, I was living at home with my parents at the time, and I spent a lot of time on my front porch watching anole lizards. And I don't think I noticed them before. Like I'd seen them, outside and stuff, but they're little green lizards and sometimes they're brown. And so I sat there for months. I feel like we were, in lockdown for some time, but I quarantined and I was watching these lizards for so long. I was convinced it was a nature show. Like I was like, I get to just admire these things all day. And so one of the times that I was watching them, I could have sworn that I saw one lizard changing colors to hunt or to fight another lizard and then change back to green. So it changed from green to brown to green. And I got a little bit on video, but I wasn't convinced. And I was like, maybe it was just a different lizard. So that was in maybe like 2020. Fast forward to this past weekend. I went to Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge, which is in Georgia, and it's a swamp refuge. So it's mostly swamp area, but there's trees and things like that. And on the boardwalk that I was on, there were more of these lizards. And so I just stopped for a second and I saw a male kind of flare up. He turned green and he had his I forget what they're called, but like the neck frill thing, it's red. So he's like flaring his thing out. And I was like, oh, he must see a female somewhere. And then I noticed the female on the ground.
Way.
And so I'm just watching this happen. And then another male comes over and they start doing it together. And I have this on video. I'm going to post it this week, but they start circling each other and then they eventually go to battle and fall off of the boardwalk. What? And before all this happens, the brown one changed green. Like it had changed into his fighting armor. And so now I feel like my question from 4 years ago, do these lizards change colors for specific things, was answered in that moment. And I was like, they must change for hunting and fighting or finding their mates. And I was just geeking out by myself for 20 minutes watching these lizards. And that is what nature journaling is to me.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I've always said, because in my workshops, sometimes people say, oh, I have this question, but I don't know the answer. And I always say, it's okay not to know at all, but it's also okay not to know yet, because writing it down and thinking about it, pondering it, it puts it into your mind and you carry that with you, and the answer might come years down the line. I love that you've got a physical example of that. Your mind was open, you had these observations ready to go, and there you've confirmed what you noticed before.
Yeah, it was really cool. So I felt like I was having my Steve Irwin moment. I was like, look at these males going at it. And now I can add that to my journal. I can add that to my observations.
That is super cool. I've seen you online using different media. You said color pencils were your first, but you also paint on large canvases in different media. You use digital media. You even use embroidery. I love that your creativity spans so many different mediums. Yeah. Do you have a favorite?
I would say right now my favorite is acrylic painting and nature journaling, because I could take that with me. Yeah. But I love acrylic painting and I love setting up my art easel outside. So I'm usually in nature when I'm painting, listening to the birds. And I've tried out a lot of different mediums. I love just trying them out. And I have I'll have a vision and see like, what does this look like in this media? Like seeing it in embroidery versus on a canvas is really cool. And then I'm proud because I made both of them.
Yeah.
So yeah, I try not to limit myself, but I do have my favorites that I go back to more often.
And I noticed that really bright, vibrant colors seem to come into your work a lot. I am passionate about color. You can see it behind me. I've got color everywhere.
Yeah.
Tell me about color and how you feel when you're using bright colors. Tell me what color means to you.
Color is everything. I feel like it's another form of expression.
Yeah.
And when I first started painting, it was actually during quarantine. I started painting more. I had been painting a little bit before that, but this was when I kind of got into a new style of painting, which I just kind of call it like a flow state.
Mm-hmm.
And I bought some new paints and just put all the colors that I liked. Like I usually just pick out the pretty ones that like call to me, or maybe it's muted or earth tones that time. And then I'll just kind of pick a brush and flow with it. Like I like the feeling of the paint on the canvas. I love to see how much I can paint without cleaning the brush. So a lot of my pieces are done like just with one brush until I feel like I've mixed enough colors. And I like watching the colors mix together. There's something, I feel like I'm having a whole experience, like just thinking about it.
Yeah.
But I love that part of my art too, is like getting to just be with it. And I think that's when my brain really like, I don't know if I even have thoughts. I'm just in that canvas, like flowing with the paint and the colors. So I feel like they're telling that story, like however they're mixing.
Yeah, I love that so much. It seems to me like nature experiences and painting for you are a kind of a dropping into the senses, a dropping into the body rather than the mind. Mm-hmm. Does that feel true?
For sure. I definitely am an overthinker. So when I can do things that like I can like catch myself pause, like, dang, I don't even know if I had a thought for 2 minutes. Yeah. And that was just such a like breath of fresh air to just turn my brain off for a second. And I feel like with painting, I don't feel like you can make mistakes. Like you can even paint over it, or you can just like keep going with it. Like it gets me into the space where I embrace what I didn't think would work. And I'm like, how can I make this work? How can I continue to work with something that I'm like, why did I make that one paint stroke? And then I'll keep going. And by the end, I'm like, that's actually my favorite paint stroke in the painting. So just kind of that reminder again of like letting go of perfection. Yeah.
And you talked about your cartoons, your art cartoons. And I saw one that you posted and it was about having a little chat with your inner critic. And I'm interested about that because we all have this mean little person on our shoulder. Yeah. And I'm interested in your experience of that and how you sort of be gentle with her and talk and let her be there at the side without dominating too much.
Yeah, for sure. So when I came up with the idea of seasonally, it was kind of trying to embrace all the different parts of myself. So like artistically, critically, so like it's an adverb, but like a play on all the things, right? So like adventurously and all of the things. I can't think of more words, but that particular one was representative of my inner critic. And I felt really vulnerable sharing it. Like even just the sound of my voice saying it and all the different things, like I was critiquing it as I was making it. But I wanted to create a space where like I was just acknowledging like, this is one of my personas. I am actually very self-critical. And I would say things that not only would I not say to another person, I wouldn't want them to say it to themselves. Yes. And so that was really just me like shining a light on a part of myself. And I'm like, I know she's here, but I don't want her to necessarily be driving because it comes from a place of like, anxiety or fear, or like whatever those things are, your inner critic wants to keep you in your safe, controlled space that is probably not you living your best life. And so that's what that post was about, is just like really acknowledging that and just being okay with it. Sometimes I will just remind myself like, oof, I'm being a little critical right now. Like, let me give myself some grace and really celebrate the things that I have done. I think I've done some really amazing things and I don't often take time to like celebrate it. So it doesn't feel like a win. Yeah.
This little voice is, it's something that I've been working on forever, and instead of like going, even like criticizing the inner critic is a tendency, but I'm trying to like say, hi, what you doing? How you going? Like,
Yeah, what are you trying to tell me?
Yeah.
What are you afraid of? Like, thank you for your awareness, but I will take it from here.
Exactly. I think being gentle with ourselves in the way, like you say, that we would be gentle with other people is so important, and such a lesson that you just have to learn again and again and again forever.
Right.
I love that you bring all this to nature journaling, and also sharing that with other people. And you love to do hiking and you love bird watching, and I'm wondering about your experiences, your specific experiences outside bird watching and hiking. But I have a question from a podcast listener called Linda, and Linda said Linda's interested in your biggest out in the wild world hiking and birding adventure, and your smallest close to home moment of wonder. And I'm thinking you've alluded to your biggest, but I want to hear that story, and then we can talk about the littlest, smallest, like backyard wonder that you've had. Let's talk about your big and small adventures.
All right, big and small. Okay, so the biggest one, we're going to the top of the world's tallest freestanding mountain, Mount Kilimanjaro, in Tanzania, Africa.
Wow.
And I was a part of a really great team. There's a not-for-profit based in the U.S. called Outdoor Afro.
Yes.
It's all about creating opportunities for Black people to reconnect in nature, and create opportunities for leadership. And so I joined Outdoor Afro in 2016 or 2017. In my first leadership training, we met up at, I think it was at the National Conservation Training Center, and there was a video playing of Phil Henderson, who is a very experienced outdoorsman. If you don't know him, you should definitely look him up.
I'm writing things down.
And he pops up on the screen. Yeah, Phil Henderson. And so he pops up on the screen and is talking about a dream that he had of taking an all-Black team up Mount Kilimanjaro. And I knew instantly that I wanted to go. I was like, oh, I've never thought of wanting to do this, but right now it's the only thing I want to do. And at the time so we all ended up applying and being accepted as members of that expedition team. And at the time I was the youngest and least experienced. So I had never been camping. I had never been backpacking.
Wow. And,
really had like minimal experience outside from like hiking, like day hiking.
Yeah.
And so we spent about a year training, which was really great. I had, I was in New Mexico, so I had elevation that I could train with, but I was really trying to prepare myself mentally. I felt like that was going to be my biggest battle, was mentally getting myself up the mountain. I felt like physically I was in enough shape that I could, work out for the next year. But I knew mentally I would be pushed beyond my limits. And before we left, we had a conversation as a team about things like, how do you like to be supported? If you're having a moment, if you're upset, do you like for people to hug you? Do you want space? And I'd never thought about that before. And I'm glad we talked about it before we went, because there were times when we needed to know that kind of stuff. And we were also asked, like, what if you don't make it to the top of the mountain? And this climb was all about embracing the climbing culture of Tanzania, Africa, which in comparison to the US, things can just be more about like conquering a mountain or like bagging a peak. It's very like, I just want to go as fast as I can, versus Tanzania is about embracing the mountain, embracing the landscape, getting to experience the community of people that you're with. And so the contrast there was something we were excited to explore. So we learned Swahili so that we could speak to our porters and guides.
That's amazing.
It was really cool. Yeah. And they, of course, were teaching us along the way, but because we had spent some time learning some of the basic language, we were able to communicate and enjoy their community, or like their company, even more.
That's really respectful.
So yeah, I loved it. I thought it was really thoughtful. And it was something that the leadership team was encouraging us to do. And I was grateful for it. Because there's nothing like having a language barrier when you could have made a little bit more effort. Yeah. So, and the porters and guides really appreciated it. They were like, we don't often get people that are having conversations with us. And so the team ended up being 13 people. And I believe it was mostly women. I can't remember the ratio anymore. But they were also excited to see that many women on the mountain at one time in one group, that many Black women.
Yes.
And so the entire adventure took us 6 days total to get to the top of the mountain. And as we're going up, we're going through the different biomes that are present on the mountain. We're going through different climate zones. We started in the jungle, and then we're making our way up, and then we're in volcanic rock, and then, all the way to the top, which is a glacier. And my favorite and least favorite, I don't know if I should call it my least favorite. It was just the most difficult day of the climb for me was day 3. This was the day that we were going to be acclimating. And so we were going to hike starting at around 16,000 feet. 13,000, hike up to 16 and then sleep around 13. So your body would acclimate to
okay.
Yeah, get used to that elevation gain, because one of the biggest things that can happen on a mountain like that is altitude sickness. And it can get pretty severe, but you really want to be monitoring your body and your food intake and stuff. And so during that specific day was my first time doing my first outside poo, which I can't not include this in the story. And so I went on during the lunch break, that's what I was working on. And I was sending a message. So that's how we were saying it. And I ended up not eating my full lunch, which was something that they encouraged us to do. And so by the halfway point of the day, I already wasn't feeling well. And we had been out in the sun we're in volcanic rock, so there aren't any more trees. And we'd been in the sun for the full day. And by the time we got to the halfway point, I was like, I'm exhausted. And then we had to go down this steep valley, which was the first time that I encountered well, not the first time ever, but the first time on the mountain that I encountered my fear of heights. And we had to kind of scramble down a valley, which seemed much more difficult now that my body was like 7 hours worth of fatigued. And so I could immediately feel myself kind of getting worked up, kind of going into what I now know is a panic attack and like really struggling to keep going. And my team really rallied around me. All the guides that were with us kind of picked up on that. And one of them in particular, his name was Abdi. He put his hand next to mine and he said, just put all of your weight onto me. And so we were holding hands and hiking. I don't know. I feel like we hiked like that for hours. My concept of time was gone at that point. And I feel like I could see the camp. We just weren't getting there fast enough. And at one point we stopped and I was shaking like I was freezing. And they're like, are you okay? Are you cold? I'm like, no, I just need to get to camp. And I just was like so full of adrenaline and stress that my body was like shaking. And we get to camp and I like collapsed in my tent and signed into camp. And they brought me I think it was like an eggplant. I'm not sure what it was. It was dark at that point. And I think powdered milk and a fried eggplant. That's what I think I ate. And I didn't like the texture of it. So I could immediately feel myself like about to get sick. And I ended up throwing up in my tent, which was really embarrassing. And I was like, no one's going to want to camp with me now. And, it's like the least important thing is what I was worried about. And one of my teammates, Alora, came and helped me clean up and get back to dinner. And she's like, I think you should just join us for dinner. They took my blood oxygen levels. So they monitored our I don't know, not body numbers for the time to make sure that you could still physically do the climb. And they told me, you just need to eat, drink, stop thinking, and go to sleep. And I've never had someone sum up like my entire life experience
forever.
In one
this
sentence.
is it.
Yeah, this is the recipe for a restful night's
life.
sleep. Yeah. So just eat, sleep, drink, stop thinking. And that's it. So I went back to bed that night and I was so wound up and, I'm not ready for my climb to end. And I woke up the next day feeling brand new. I wish I could describe how I felt. It was like my sleeping bag was my cocoon. And I woke up a butterfly that next day and I had so much energy. I was so excited that I got through the hardest day, which actually wasn't even the hardest part. So I ended up having to like scramble on some other parts as we were going up. But because of that day, I don't know. The fear just wasn't the same. The fear of heights. I am still afraid of heights. I do need to say that. So it's not like I conquered my fear of heights forever on this one climb. And so we ended up continuing for the next 3 days. It was still a difficult hike, but I was really proud of myself for getting through that third day. We made our push for the summit at, I believe it was midnight or 11. So it was like in the middle of the night.
Wow.
And it was just pitch black. You're on a glacier. And all you could see is just the lights of people's headlamps kind of dancing up the trail in front of you. And you're trying to keep your feet in the glacier footprints in front of you so you're not doing more damage to the glacier than you need to. And also it's less slippery and things like that. And as we're going up, my teammates are each reaching their individual summit. So, they're turning around and porters and guides are going. And eventually there were only 5 of us. And we decided that if any of us turn around from there, we'll all go back so that we're not short guides. And we ended up making it to the summit, I think at like almost 7:30 in the morning. So the sun was just rising. There were 5 of us that made it from the Kilimanjaro team. So there were 4 women and 1 man that made it. And I just was so proud of myself.
Yeah.
But I also felt like I couldn't have made it to the top if I hadn't made it through the 3rd day.
Mm-mm-mm.
So when I tell the story, I always say that my summit day, although I reached the highest point on the mountain, my summit day was the 3rd day.
Yeah.
That was the day that I really summited and like surpassed what I was telling myself I was physically capable of. And the 4th lesson to your question earlier about lessons in nature, the summit is not always the top of the mountain. It is okay to not reach the highest point.
Yeah, I love that you said people were turning around, they'd reached their individual summit, and that was the focus, and that was a success. There's this, I think in mountaineering, that there's this thing, this sense that you failed if you haven't reached the tallest place, but to reach the place that you have strived for, and that's your individual summit, that's a really powerful lesson, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And that was something that we really kind of embraced as a team. Like, we didn't want people to feel like they failed because they didn't make it to the highest point. And we also were there collectively. And so we still carried that flag together. We knew what it represented. And afterwards, all of my teammates surprised me and signed that flag and gifted it to me. So I still have the flag that we held at the top. And they really just celebrated my growth. They were, they were there to witness what I had felt, and I could never describe it, but I do have this group of people that share that memory with me, and it was just really special to get to be a part of that. And I will tell that story for the rest of my life. Yeah. It was one of the most exciting things I've ever done. But I loved that climb. And I feel like you said there was something in there about the highest or the biggest adventure with birds. So the bird part is that there was a white-necked raven that was there on the mountain with us. And on day 2, we were above the clouds, which I've never experienced that in my life. We were like standing above the clouds. So we only got higher above them as we were climbing. But there was this raven that followed us throughout. And my imagination was telling me, like, this is my travel buddy. Yes. Like, we're doing this mountain together. And of course, like, it's probably following us because of, like, humans and food and things like that. But I told myself that it was my travel companion up the mountain.
That's super special. Gosh, even that you have a fear of heights and you decided, yep, I'm going to do this. And you got through that day. And then the moment of just supporting each other, it really must have knitted you together as a group, but also with your guides, and just that human to human connection of supporting each other in those crisis moments is something really special.
For sure. I definitely had to share with my team ahead of time that I was afraid of heights. I wanted them to be able to support me and to know that I wouldn't want to be panicking in a moment. And that's like the first time anyone's ever heard that. But I also like cried and was emotional.
Course,
So I was menstruating on this climb also. That was my last.
Makes it 10 times harder.
Yeah. And it was actually the least memorable part of it. I remember like being so worried about how to like all the things, and it was like the least memorable part of that climb, but it did contribute to like this. It is tougher.
Yeah.
And I feel like my teammates really showed up for me, and the first step for that was like asking for support or saying like, I'm really scared right now. Yeah. Like, this is really high. So that people could position themselves so that I felt more comfortable. And that's something that really meant a lot to me.
What an amazing story. And you also got to tell your story as part of a book. Do you want to talk about the book project?
Yeah, absolutely. So this book, Nature Swagger, Stories and Visions of Black Joy in the Outdoors, by Rue Mapp, and she is the founder of Outdoor Afro.
Okay.
And, definitely someone that I've admired for a long time. And it was really, it meant so much. Like, I can't even describe it, to be a part of this book, this story, and to get to tell my story again. And it felt really full circle because I got to share the story about climbing Kilimanjaro, which was something I got to do through Outdoor Afro, that Rue established. And so that meant a lot to me. And if you get the book, the picture that I'm in, I'm sitting in an Eno hammock that I designed, inspired by that climb. And so that hammock really tells the story of the mountain, and it captures the essence of the colors and the feelings and the joy. And I just love that it's also a collection of stories, so you can kind of read through and I don't know, there's just so many cool things in this book, but I felt really honored to be a part of it.
I've ordered the book and I'm ready. I can't wait to receive it and read your story and hold it in my hand and see the photo. So do you want to talk? So you've had some artistic collaborations with Outdoor Afro as well, and I'd love for you to talk about that, the hammock and the socks and the things that you've created that have become physical things that people are wearing and using and out there with your art in the world.
Yeah, my inner artist is like singing and just so excited about this moment, because there was a time when it didn't feel as possible. And I felt really special that Outdoor Afro asked me to design these products that were in collaboration with different brands. So the hammock, I got to tell the story of Mount Kilimanjaro. The Smart Wool socks, one of those I designed during quarantine. And so the slice of nature is like, this is the nature I wish I could be in. It's a slice of pizza, but it looks like a meadow with a log, and I thought it was really clever.
That's
so
nice.
that is that design. And there's also the Juneteenth sock, which is really cute. It's got yellow and all the black faces on there. And then lastly, the Keen hiking sandal
Cool.
is a part of the Making Waves program with Outdoor Afro, which is designed to combat the number of Black kids that are more likely to drown, or 5 times as likely to drown, because they don't have access to swim lessons and to pools. And so that program is all about creating opportunities for people to get a swimmership, which is like swimming lessons, and with the hopes that they'll also go on and teach other people and like give back to their community as well. And I think in that project, there was a commitment to maybe 100,000 swimming lessons over the next 10 years with that partnership. So it was really cool to get to do a piece that is a part of that.
That's so wonderful, not only connecting people with the beauty of being in the water, but also safety, which is so important. And that this disparity in access to swimming lessons and nature spaces is, that project just, when I read about it, really, I found that really important. So that is so amazing that you've done all these things. Your art is out there. Can people still buy these things? Can they buy the hammock? Can they buy these things?
Yeah, all of them are still available. I believe the Keen boots you can find on the Keen website, so Keen footwear. The Eno hammock is available on Eno's website and at REI, and the Smart Wool socks I think are also still at REI or on the Smart Wool website. And so if you look up Outdoor Afro / those collaborations or those brands, you should be able to find it.
I will leave these links in the show notes for today's podcast, and so people can have a look and see your art out there.
Yay.
And maybe purchase them as well. Now, I want to go back to Linda's question. So you talked about this amazing, life-changing, grand adventure in another country, and I want to hear now about your smallest close-to-home moment of wonder and whatever that means to you.
Yeah, so I'm excited about this one. So I'm going to take you back to the animal documentaries. So when I was younger, I had this computer game called Zoo Tycoon, where you could like build your own zoo and like you could have animals and stuff. And it came with a DVD. It was like an animal documentary DVD. And one of the animals that they talked about on that DVD was the dung beetle. And I just have been fascinated with them I think they're so cute. Like there's something about
They
like
are
nature's
cute.
little like cleanup artists, and they're doing the duty job that no one wants to do. And that was like, in my childhood. And so when I was at my first internship, I got to go and do a snail survey in Roswell, New Mexico. And while we were out in the field, we're looking for this like tiny spring snail that's like the tip of your pen size. And we're hunched over these like containers trying to count the snails. And from the corner of my eye, I see something flash. And it was a dung beetle. And I was so excited. I had never seen one in person. And it had its little ball of poop. He's just rolling it along. And I started freaking out. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's a dung beetle. And I'm there with like 3 or 4 biologists. So they're all just as into it. So we took like a science break to go geek out about this dung beetle that was on the ground. And I think that was one of the first times that I've seen something in a documentary. And then I got to see it outside. And so it felt like little Leandra got to see something that she had been admiring for so long. And I think sometimes it feels like it can feel far removed, and you realize like, oh, those are here. Like, I don't know why I was expecting it to be in some remote place on a different continent, and it's right here. And I can see it now. And I even did a comic that was inspired by that. It was someone walking, and they stepped in the poo pile, not realizing like that there were bugs like feasting on it, which you got to really be into the science geeky stuff to laugh at that. But that's what that one was inspired by.
That's amazing. And I've had a similar experience. I've told this story on the podcast before, but I'll tell you, which was that I did this painting, and it was of this particular bird that is a superb fairy wren. It's a very small bird. It's got really showy blue markings, the male does. And anyway, I spent time doing this painting for a commission, and I sent the painting off. I still hadn't seen the bird. I was working from photographs. And then one day I was going on a local walk. It was just like I walked from my home and I went for a walk, half an hour. And I saw, because I'd spent so much time painting this guy and his mate, the female is very plain, but she also has really distinctive sort of markings. And I'd spent hours meticulously doing these brushstrokes, so I just knew them inside out, and I saw the female flash by me, and it was like sighting a celebrity. I was just like, oh man, look, she's here, and he's going to be here too.
Yeah,
the couple, this famous couple that I'd spent time looking at. And then
I love that.
And then there he was, and it was just. I feel like it's the same experience as the dung beetle, like, because you'd seen him on TV. He was like this TV celebrity.
Like, that's it. Oh my gosh, I'm looking at you right now.
Yeah, and it's wonderful to know, like you said, these things are actually right here, and all we have to do is just start tuning in. I'd love to hear you speak about that. How you would encourage people through your work or just through conversations to start doing that, to tune in to what's right in our backyards, or if we don't have a backyard, just like you say, just throw open the window and look at the sky. There's things out there to see, and I'd love to hear your take on that.
Yeah, for sure. I think the first piece of advice that I have is just slow down a little bit, and take your time looking. Like I like to often just sit in the same spot, just one spot, and just sit there and see what I can see. And all of a sudden you'll start seeing all the little movements that you didn't notice. So like the inchworms, the butterflies, maybe you're noticing how the wind is blowing the trees or the leaves. And I think if you don't have your own backyard or your own front yard, you can go to parks or other spaces like that, or you could just roll your window down and just enjoy some fresh air. You can, I don't know, I feel like nature is everywhere outside, and you just have to find that. And so even in the city, if you're looking like in the planted trees and, or if there's birds there, bird watching is one of my favorite things to do, is because there's birds everywhere. Yes. There's all types of different birds, whether you're in the city or not. And so really slowing down, I think you could get lost in the different number of birds that are present in your space. So that's another one that I like. And also I think it's still okay to explore digitally, maybe if there's documentary. I still love nature documentaries. It's one of my favorite things to do. I still nature journal things that I'm learning about on those documentaries. And so sometimes I'm immersed in nature, but I am submerged in my bed. So
yeah, absolutely.
You just gotta make it work for yourself.
Yeah, my son was watching one of those real-time animal cameras that they place all around the world. Have you experienced those?
Yes. Yeah. So there are a couple different ones that I watched. One of my favorite ones is a pair of bald eagles. And they've just been going through all of the winter things, but this pair has just like stayed with their eggs. They haven't moved during a blizzard. And I don't know. I could just watch cams like that all day. I think they have like otter cams. They often have them at zoos, so different animals you can watch. And yeah, that's sort of actually a really great way to explore.
Yeah. Leandra, thank you so much for joining me. I feel really excited. I'm going to chase up all the people that you've mentioned today, and I just really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me on the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. This has been a great conversation.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Leandra. I loved the story of climbing Mount Kilimanjaro and each person on the team finding their own personal summit, and all the learnings and lessons that Leandra finds in the outdoors. I especially love the sense of joy and wonder that comes through in every nature story that Leandra tells. I've put lots of links in the show notes to where you can find Leandra online, the designs she created in collaboration with Outdoor Afro, and links to some of the inspirational people that she mentioned during our conversation. Please do follow those links and connect with Leandra's story. She's amazing. Thank you so much for listening. See you next week.